The Isolated Beekeeper and the Dragon, Part 1. The morning sun cast long shadows across the meadow as Marcus Chun tended to his hives. The familiar hum of 10,000 bees creating a peaceful symphony around his remote homestead. For 15 years he had lived alone on the edge of human space, keeping bees and selling honey to passing traders. The isolation suited him perfectly after losing his family in the Centauri raids. The ground trembled beneath his feet, causing the bees to buzz angrily. Marcus looked up from the hive he was inspecting to see something impossible descending from the sky. A dragon, easily 50 meters long, was crashing through the atmosphere with smoke trailing from its wounds. Its scales, once brilliant emerald, were now scarred and blackened. What made Marcus's heart race wasn't just the sight of a creature from Earth's ancient myths, but what he could see clutched protectively against the dragon's belly. 4 small forms, no larger than human children, clung to their parent with desperate strength. The dragon hit the ground with tremendous force, carving a furrow through Marcus's carefully maintained flower fields. Steam rose from its massive body as it struggled to raise its head, golden eyes filled with pain and something that looked remarkably like shame. Marcus had read enough xenobiology reports to know that dragons were supposed to be proud, territorial creatures. This one looked defeated. Marcus approached slowly, his hands raised to show he meant no harm. The dragon's breathing was labored, and he could see deep burns across its wings and flanks. Plasma scoring, the kind used by hegemony battleships. The 4 small dragons huddled closer to their parent, their own tiny scales dulled with exhaustion and fear. "Easy there," Marcus said softly, the same tone he used with frightened animals. "I'm not going to hurt you." The large dragon's head turned toward him, and when it spoke, the voice was surprisingly melodious despite the obvious pain. "Human, I know your kind. You will call your authorities. They will take my daughters and study them like specimens." Marcus stopped walking. The dragon was female, and those weren't just young dragons, they were her children. He had heard rumors from deep space traders about the hegemonies, new policy regarding anomalous species, but he had never imagined it would apply to something like this. "I won't call anyone," Marcus said firmly. "But you're hurt badly. You need help." The dragon's laugh was bitter. "Help? Your species hunts mine across the galaxy. We are too few, too different. The hegemony decided we are a threat to human expansion. They found our hidden world 3 cycles ago and began their cleansing." Marcus felt his stomach drop. He had been isolated for so long that he hadn't heard about any recent military campaigns. Cleansing? They kill the adults and take the young for experimentation. They want to understand our fire, our flight, our longevity. My mate died protecting our nest. I escaped with only these 4. The dragon's wings shifted slightly, revealing 4 small faces peering out with large, frightened eyes that held far too much intelligence for their apparent age. Marcus looked at the 4 young dragons. They couldn't be more than a few years old, but their eyes held the same ancient wisdom he had seen in their mother's gaze. One of them, with scales that shimmered between gold and silver, made a small chirping sound that was almost like a question. "Mama, is the human going to hurt us?" The little one asked imperfect, if childish, standard. Marcus's heart clenched. These weren't monsters or specimens. They were a family running for their lives. "No, little one," Marcus said, crouching down to be less intimidating. "I'm going to help you. All of you." The mother dragon studied him for a long moment. "Why? We are not your kind." "Helping us brands you as a traitor to your own species." Marcus thought of his wife and daughter, lost to alien raiders 15 years ago. He remembered the helplessness, the rage at a universe that could be so randomly cruel. But he also remembered the kindness of strangers who had helped him rebuild, the quiet heroes who chose compassion over fear. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said simply. "And because no parent should have to watch their children suffer." The dragon's eyes widened slightly. "You speak of children. You have young?" "I did, once." Marcus stood and walked closer, noting how the mother dragon tensed but didn't retreat. "They died in a raid." I know what it's like to lose everything. Understanding passed between them, the universal language of grief and parental love that transcended species. The mother dragon slowly lowered her great head to the ground. I am Theraleth of the Ember Peaks clan. These are my daughters, Zephyra, Lirale, Moranis, and little Stelle. Each young dragon peeked out as their name was called, tiny claws gripping their mother's scales. Marcus Chun, he replied with a slight bow. And you're all welcome on my land for as long as you need. Tharaleth's breathing was becoming more labored. The plasma burns were worse than Marcus had initially thought, and he could see that infection was setting in around the edges of the wounds. If she didn't get treatment soon, she would die, leaving her 4 daughters orphaned and defenseless. I need to get you medical supplies, Marcus said. Can your daughters understand the danger of being seen? The 4 young dragons nodded solemnly. Zephyra, who appeared to be the eldest at perhaps 5 or 6 years old, spoke up. We know to hide from the bad humans. Mama taught us. Marcus felt another stab of anger at what these children had been forced to endure. Good, I'm going to bring help, but I need you all to stay hidden in my barn until I can make sure it's safe. Getting Theraleth to the barn required careful planning. She was far too large to fit through the main doors, but Marcus had built the structure with high ceilings and wide loading bays for his honey operation. With great effort and obvious pain, Theraleth managed to crawl inside. Her daughters clustering around her like tiny sentinels, Marcus's barn became a makeshift sanctuary. He cleared out his equipment and laid down fresh bedding. Then began the delicate process of treating Theraleth's wounds with the veterinary supplies he kept for his bees and the occasional injured wildlife. The dragon bore the pain stoically, but Marcus could see how each touch sent shockwaves through her massive frame. The 4 young dragons proved to be remarkably helpful. Despite their youth, they had an intuitive understanding of their mother's needs, bringing her water in salvaged containers and using their small flames to provide precise heat for the medicinal preparations Marcus was mixing. Your daughters are remarkable, Marcus told Tharaleth as he cleaned one particularly deep wound. They're so mature for their age. Dragon young mature quickly in times of crisis, Tharaleth replied, her voice strained. They have seen too much death already. They should be playing in crystal caves and learning to shape clouds, not running from hunters. Marcus paused in his work. Crystal caves? Cloud shaping? Tharaleth's eyes grew distant. Our homeworld, before the humans found us. We lived in harmony with the elements, creating beauty and wonder. We were artists, philosophers, guardians of ancient knowledge. Your people saw only weapons to be studied and threats to be eliminated. The injustice of it hit Marcus like a physical blow. Here was a species with capabilities beyond human understanding, reduced to refugees because humanity feared what it couldn't control. It reminded him of Earth's own dark history, when fear of the different had driven countless genocides and cultural extinctions. Not all humans think that way, Marcus said quietly. Some of us believe the galaxy is big enough for everyone. Little Stelle, who had been quietly watching the adults talk, suddenly perked up and looked toward the barn entrance. Her small head tilted as if listening to something beyond human hearing. Ship's coming, she whispered urgently. Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. Through the barn's small windows, he could see the distinctive blue glow of hegemony patrol craft descending toward his homestead. Tharaleth struggled to rise, her maternal instincts overriding her injuries. Take my daughters, she gasped. Leave me. Save them. No, Marcus said firmly, his mind racing through possibilities. We save everyone or no one. The patrol ships were landing in his front yard, and Marcus could hear the heavy boots of armed soldiers approaching. He looked at the 4 young dragons, their eyes wide with terror, then at their mother, who was preparing to sacrifice herself for her children's safety. Marcus. Jian had spent 15 years running from his past, hiding in isolation from a galaxy that had taken everything he loved. But as he looked at this dragon family facing extinction, he realized that some things were worth fighting for, even if it meant abandoning the safety of his exile. Trust me, he whispered to Tharaleth and her daughters. I have an idea. The sound of soldiers searching his house echoed across the meadow. Marcus knew he had maybe 10 minutes before they expanded their search to the barn. 10 minutes to save a family and maybe find some redemption for his own lost one. The bees hummed louder in their hives. As if sensing the tension, Marcus looked out at his peaceful homestead, knowing that whatever happened in the next few minutes would change everything forever. But for the first time in 15 years, he felt truly alive. He was no longer just a beekeeper hiding from the galaxy. He was about to become something much more dangerous, a human who refused to look away when faced with injustice. The Isolated Beekeeper and the Dragon, Part 2. Marcus moved with practiced efficiency, years of solitary living having taught him to think quickly under pressure. He activated the hidden panel in his barn wall, revealing a smuggler's compartment he had installed years ago but never used. Originally intended for hiding illegal goods from customs inspectors, it was just large enough for 4 young dragons. "In here, quickly," he whispered to Zephyra, Lirale, Miranis, and little Stelle. "Your mother and I need to handle the soldiers." The 4 young dragons looked uncertainly between Marcus and their injured mother. Thyroleth raised her great head despite the obvious pain. "Go, my treasures. Trust the beekeeper. He has kind eyes." The eldest daughter, Zephyra, helped her sisters into the cramped hiding space. Just before Marcus sealed the panel, she looked up at him with eyes that held centuries of inherited wisdom despite her young age. "Will you really protect us?" she asked quietly. "With my life," Marcus promised, and meant it completely. The hidden panel clicked shut just as heavy footsteps approached the barn. Marcus quickly threw a tarp over Thyroleth, hoping the dim lighting would disguise her true size and shape. She curled herself into the smallest possible configuration, though even at her most compact, she resembled a very large piece of farming equipment. The barn door burst open, and 3 hegemony soldiers entered with weapons drawn. Their leader, a tall woman with lieutenant's stripes, swept the space with her scanner while her subordinates checked the corners. "You Marcus Chun?" the lieutenant asked without preamble. "That's right." "Is there a problem, officer?" Marcus kept his voice steady, though his heart was hammering against his ribs. "We detected an unregistered atmospheric entry in this sector. Large object, likely a ship. Our sensors lost the signature somewhere over your property." The lieutenant's scanner beeped as it passed over the tarp-covered Thyroleth. "What's under there?" Marcus felt sweat beading on his forehead. "Old harvesting equipment. Been meaning to sell it, but the market's been slow." The lieutenant gestured to one of her men, who grabbed the edge of the tarp. Marcus's mind raced through a dozen scenarios, all of them ending with dragon fire and plasma bolts. But as the tarp came away, revealing Thyroleth's carefully positioned form, the soldier just frowned. "Ugly piece of machinery," he commented. "What's it for?" Marcus could barely breathe. In the dim barn light, with her wings folded tight and her head tucked down, Thyroleth did indeed look like some kind of bizarre agricultural device. Her scales, dulled by injury and exhaustion, resembled corroded metal plating. "Honey extraction and processing," Marcus managed to say. "Pre-war design. They don't make them like that anymore." The lieutenant's scanner continued beeping irregularly. "These readings are strange. High energy residue, exotic particles." She looked suspiciously at Marcus. "You running some kind of illegal operation here, Chun?" Before Marcus could answer, a new voice cut through the tension. "Lieutenant Morrison, stand down immediately." Everyone turned to see a figure stepping through the barn entrance. Marcus's heart sank as he recognized Admiral Sarah Voss, one of the hegemony's most decorated officers. Her presence here meant this wasn't a routine patrol, it was a targeted operation. "Admiral," Lieutenant Morrison snapped to attention. "We were investigating the atmospheric breach." Admiral Voss was a small woman in her 60s, with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen too much war. She looked around the barn with the calculating gaze of someone who had spent decades hunting enemies across the galaxy. Her attention fixed on the concealed Thyroleth. "Interesting equipment you have there, Mr. Chun," she said casually, walking closer to the disguised dragon. "May I ask where you acquired it?" Marcus felt the walls closing in. Admiral Voss wasn't just any officer. She was known throughout human space as the architect of the hegemony's expansion policies. If she was here personally, it meant the dragon hunt was far more important than he had realized. Bought it from a scrap dealer on Kepler Station, Marcus lied smoothly. Like I told your lieutenant, it's old pre-war tech. Admiral Voss nodded thoughtfully, then did something that made Marcus's blood freeze. She reached out and placed her hand directly on Theroleth's hidden flank. Fascinating, the Admiral murmured. This metal is still warm, almost like it's alive. The barn fell silent except for the distant humming of Marcus's beehives. Theroleth remained perfectly still, but Marcus could see the slight tremor in her concealed breathing. Any moment now, the Admiral would realize what she was touching. Then little Stelle sneezed. The sound was barely audible, muffled by the hidden panel, but in the tense silence it might as well have been a gunshot. Admiral Voss's head snapped toward the sound, her hand dropping to her sidearm. "Lieutenant, search this building thoroughly," she ordered. "I want every crate opened, every hiding spot checked." Marcus stepped forward, forcing himself to remain calm. "Admiral, with respect, this is private property. Do you have a search warrant?" Admiral Voss smiled coldly. "Mr. Chun, we're hunting one of the most dangerous predator species in the galaxy. A creature that could incinerate your entire homestead with a single breath. If it's hiding here, a warrant is the least of your concerns." The soldiers began systematically tearing apart Marcus's barn. They opened feed sacks, overturned equipment, and methodically worked their way toward the hidden panel. Marcus calculated distances and angles, wondering if he could create enough of a distraction for the young dragons to escape. Then Admiral Voss spoke again, and her words changed everything. "We know about your family. Mr. Chun, your wife Elena and daughter Sarah, killed in the Centauri raids 15 years ago. Records show you've been living alone ever since, selling honey to traders and keeping to yourself." She paused, studying his face. What would drive a peaceful beekeeper to harbor an enemy of humanity? Marcus met her gaze steadily. "Maybe I don't see enemies everywhere I look. That's admirable in a naive sort of way. But these creatures aren't refugees, Mr. Chun. They're weapons. Living ships capable of interstellar travel, armed with plasma breath and nearly indestructible scales. They could devastate human colonies before we even knew they were coming. The only devastation I see is a wounded mother trying to protect her children." Marcus replied. Admiral Voss's eyebrows rose slightly. "Children? That's an interesting choice of words. What makes you think we're dealing with juveniles?" Marcus realized his mistake immediately, but it was too late to take back the words. Admiral Voss's expression shifted from suspicious to triumphant. "Search behind that back wall," she ordered. "There's a hidden compartment." The soldiers moved quickly, running scanners along the barn's rear wall until they found the concealed panel. Marcus watched helplessly as they prepared to expose the 4 young dragons. In moments, Zephyra Lirale Maranis and Stele would be dragged out into the open, and Theroleth would certainly try to protect them, revealing herself in the process. That's when the bees arrived. Marcus had noticed the increasing volume of their humming, but he hadn't understood what it meant until thousands of angry bees suddenly poured through the barn's ventilation system. They had been agitated by the presence of strangers and the obvious tension in the air, and now they were defending their territory with typical bee ferocity. The soldiers immediately began swatting and cursing as the bees swarmed around them. Admiral Voss stumbled backward, her hand over her face as dozens of bees buzzed around her head. In the chaos, Marcus heard a soft clicking sound as the hidden panel opened from the inside. Zephyra poked her small head out, assessed the situation with remarkable calm, and whispered something in the dragon language to her sisters. What happened next would have been hilarious if the stakes weren't so high. The 4 young dragons emerged from their hiding place and immediately began mimicking the shapes of flying bees. Their natural shape-shifting abilities, combined with their small size, allowed them to blend almost perfectly with the swarm. To the panicking soldiers, they looked like nothing more than unusually large bees in the chaotic cloud of insects. Marcus watched in amazement as the young dragons flew in formation with their bee escorts, circling the barn and adding their own small buzzing sounds to the cacophony. Stella actually landed on Admiral Voss's shoulder for a moment before taking off again, and the Admiral simply brushed at her like any other insect. "Smoke grenades!" Admiral Voss shouted over the bee noise. "Clear these things out!" But Marcus was already moving. As the soldiers fumbled for their equipment, he yanked away the tarp covering Theraleth and shouted, "Now!" The great dragon rose to her full height with a roar that shook the barn's rafters. Her golden eyes blazed with maternal fury as she saw the soldiers threatening her hidden daughters. The plasma burns along her flanks began to glow with inner fire. "Weapon!" Lieutenant Morrison screamed, bringing up her rifle. "Open fire!" Theraleth's breath blazed out in a controlled stream, not to kill but to disable. The plasma bolt melted the soldiers' weapons and scorched the barn walls, but carefully avoided injuring anyone. She was a mother protecting her young, but she was also a civilized being who understood the difference between defense and murder. The isolated beekeeper and the dragon, Part 3 Marcus, stood in the center of his barn, surrounded by an injured dragon, 4 frightened dragon children, angry bees, and some of the hegemony's most elite soldiers. The next words out of his mouth would determine whether this ended in tragedy or hope. "You want to study dragons to understand their capabilities," Marcus began, his voice steady despite the enormous stakes. "But you're going about it all wrong. You can't learn about a species by caging them and treating them as threats. You learn by earning their trust." Admiral Voss crossed her arms. 20 seconds, Mr. Chun." "Look at what just happened here," Marcus continued urgently. "Theraleth could have killed all of us. Her breath weapon melted your rifles, but she carefully avoided harming anyone. Her daughter shapeshifted to blend with my bees rather than fight. They're showing restraint and intelligence, not hostility." "They're showing tactical awareness," Admiral Voss countered. "Exactly what makes them dangerous." Marcus gestured toward little Stella, who was hovering near her mother's head with obvious concern for her injuries. "Does she look dangerous to you? Or does she look like a frightened child who's watched her family hunted across the galaxy?" For the first time, Admiral Voss's expression softened slightly as she watched the young dragon gently nuzzle her mother's wounded flank. But her voice remained firm. "Sentiment doesn't change strategic reality, Mr. Chun. These creatures represent an existential threat to human expansion." "No," Theraleth said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of ages. "We represent competition. Your species has grown accustomed to being alone among the stars. You've forgotten how to share space with equals." Admiral Voss turned to face the great dragon directly. "Equals? You can cross interstellar distances without ships. You can survive in vacuum. You wield energy weapons with the precision of our best technology. In what universe are we equals?" "In this one," Zephyra spoke up, her young voice carrying surprising authority. "Because we choose to be. Mama could have burned down this human's dwelling the moment we arrived. We could have taken what we needed by force. Instead, we asked for help, and I gave it," Marcus added. "Not because I was forced to, but because it was the right thing to do." "That's what equals do for each other?" Admiral Voss was quiet for a long moment, studying the family of dragons with calculating eyes. Marcus could see her military training warring with something else, something more human. When she finally spoke, her words surprised everyone. "Lieutenant Morrison, establish a perimeter around this property. No one enters or leaves without my authorization." "Ma'am?" The lieutenant looked confused. "I need to make some calls, and I need to think." Admiral Voss walked over to Theraleth, who tensed but didn't retreat. "If I were to hypothetically consider an alternative to containment, what would you propose?" Theraleth studied the Admiral for a long moment. "You wish to know our capabilities. We wish to survive and raise our young in peace. Perhaps there is middle ground." "Such as?" Marcus felt hope beginning to stir in his chest. "A partnership. Dragons work with human researchers voluntarily, sharing knowledge and abilities in exchange for protection and citizenship rights." Admiral Voss laughed, but it wasn't entirely dismissive. "Citizenship rights? For dragons? The Senate would have my head." "The Senate is afraid because they don't understand." Thyroleth said. Fear makes even wise beings do foolish things, but understanding breeds cooperation. Lirelei, who had been quietly listening, suddenly perked up and looked toward the barn entrance. More ships coming, but these feel different, sadder. Admiral Voss immediately activated her COM device. Oops, report. I didn't call for additional units. Ma'am, you have incoming refugee transports? 3 vessels requesting emergency landing clearance. They claim to be carrying dragon survivors from the Hegemony Pursuit Fleet. Marcus saw Fireleth's eyes widen with hope and disbelief. My people, she whispered. Some survived. Admiral Voss looked between her COM device and the dragon family. How many survivors? Sensors indicate approximately 15 adult dragons and 30 juveniles. They're requesting permission to land and... The voice paused. They're asking specifically for Thyroleth of the Ember Peaks clan. The 4 young dragons began chittering excitedly in their own language, while Thyroleth struggled to rise despite her injuries. Marcus quickly moved to support her massive head. Easy there, you're still hurt. My sisters, Thyroleth breathed. My clan, I thought they were all dead. Admiral Voss stood frozen for a moment, then made a decision that would echo throughout human space. Grant landing clearance. But keep all weapons locked on those ships until I give the all-clear. Ma'am, are you sure? That many dragons could level half the continent if they turn hostile. They won't, Marcus said with quiet confidence. They're looking for family, not a fight. The next hour transformed Marcus's peaceful homestead into the most unusual diplomatic meeting in human history. 3 sleek dragon ships, each one a living creature capable of interstellar flight, settled gently into his pastures. From each ship emerged dragons of various sizes and colorations, all bearing the scars of battle and the exhaustion of long flight. The reunion between Thyroleth and her surviving clan members was both joyful and heartbreaking. Marcus watched as the 4 young dragons were embraced by aunts and uncles they had thought lost forever. But he also saw the empty spaces where other family members should have been, the gaps left by those who hadn't escaped the hegemony's initial attack. Admiral Voss, to her credit, maintained strict discipline among her soldiers while observing everything with the keen eye of a strategic planner. When the eldest of the arriving dragons, an ancient female named Keltharies, approached for formal introductions, the Admiral met her with the respect due to a head of state. I am Admiral Sarah Voss, representing the Terran hegemony. I understand you're seeking sanctuary for your people? Keltharies regarded the Admiral with eyes that held millennia of wisdom. We seek only to exist, Admiral, to raise our young and preserve what remains of our culture. Your species has made that difficult. Our species acts from fear, Admiral Voss admitted. Fear of the unknown, fear of threats we don't understand. But perhaps Mr. Chun here has shown us a different path. Marcus found himself the center of attention as both dragons and humans looked to him expectantly. He gestured around at the assembled groups, human soldiers standing uneasily near massive creatures who could incinerate them with a breath. Look around, he said. Dragons and humans standing together without violence. We've spent the last hour proving that coexistence is possible. What if we made it permanent? Keltharies tilted her great head. You speak of peace, young human. But peace requires trust, and trust must be earned by both sides. Then let's start earning it, Admiral Voss said, surprising everyone including herself. What would it take for your people to consider a formal treaty with the hegemony? The negotiations that followed lasted 3 days and changed the course of galactic history. Marcus's barn became an impromptu conference center where the future of 2 species was decided over honeymead and carefully controlled dragonfire. The young dragons proved particularly effective ambassadors, their innocence and curiosity breaking down barriers between the adult negotiators. The breakthrough came when little Stella asked Admiral Voss a simple question. Why are humans so afraid of us? We don't want to hurt anybody? Admiral Voss looked down at the small dragon, who could barely have weighed more than a house cat despite her impressive wingspan, and found herself answering with complete honesty. Because we're used to being the strongest thing in the galaxy. Meeting someone stronger scares us. Oh, but we don't want to be stronger, Stella replied with the perfect logic of childhood. "We just want to be friends." The Ember Peaks Accords, as they came to be known, established the first formal treaty between humans and dragons. The agreement created protected territories where dragon clans could live and raise their young, while establishing research partnerships that would benefit both species. Dragons would share their knowledge of energy manipulation and interstellar travel, while humans provided medical care, technological support, and protection from hostile forces. Marcus's homestead became the site of the first joint human-dragon research facility, with Thyroleth serving as the primary liaison between species. Her 4 daughters, who had started as frightened refugees, became the first generation of dragons to grow up alongside human children in the facility's integrated education program. Admiral Voss, who had arrived as a hunter, left as an architect of peace. She spent the remainder of her career building the diplomatic framework that would allow dozens of other species to join the expanding coalition of civilized worlds, but perhaps the most important change was in Marcus himself. The isolated beekeeper who had spent 15 years hiding from the galaxy discovered that his greatest strength lay not in solitude, but in his willingness to extend compassion across species boundaries. He became the living symbol of what humanity could be at its best, not conquerors or destroyers, but partners in building something greater than any one species could achieve alone. Years later, when you